The first thing I heard was the screaming. Not human screaming. This was a raw, guttural sound of pure agony, tearing through the cold night air of the estate grounds. It was followed by the sickening, wet crack of breaking bone. I froze on the gravel path, the basket of fresh linens for the Alpha's quarters suddenly heavy in my arms. The scent hit me next: copper, pine, and wild, untamed musk. Transformation. I should have turned back. My quarters in the servants' wing were safe, removed. But my feet, traitorous things, carried me forward, drawn to the tree line like a moth to a flame. That was my first mistake. Pushing through the skeletal branches of a winter birch, I saw him. Alpha Henry was on his knees in the frozen clearing, his broad back bare and gleaming with sweat under the moonlight. His muscles corded and seized as another vertebra snapped into place with a sound that made my stomach lurch. A low, pained growl rumbled from his chest, a promise of the beast fighting its way to the surface. This was private, sacred, and I, Emily, a mere human servant, was witnessing it. I couldn't move. The horror of it was mesmerizing. The ecstasy, too. His head thrown back, tendons standing out in his neck, a shudder of both torment and release racking his powerful frame. This was the curse and the power of the Alpha laid bare. His growl cut off. The snapping of bones ceased. The heavy, panting silence that followed was worse. Slowly, with a predator's grace that defied the violence of the change he'd just halted mid-shift, he turned his head. His eyes, no longer fully human, glowed a fierce, molten amber in the dark. They pinned me to the spot. "Who's there?" His voice was a graveled threat, layered with the wolf's growl. My throat closed. I dropped the basket. The sound of it hitting the ground was absurdly loud. In a blur of motion, he was on his feet, facing me. He hadn't fully shifted. His form was terrifyingly hybrid, a mountain of a man with elongated claws and that piercing, animal gaze. He took a step forward, sniffing the air. "Emily." He knew my scent. Of course he did. I'd been cleaning his study, serving at his table for 3 years. But he'd never said my name, not like that. It wasn't a question. It was a possession. "My Alpha," I stammered, dropping my gaze to the frost-rimed leaves at his feet. "I'm sorry. I heard I was just spying." He was closer now. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the wild, dangerous scent of him. It wasn't unpleasant. That was the most terrifying part. "No, never. I was taking the linens to your chambers. I took the garden path. I didn't know." "You didn't know your Alpha would be wrestling with the beast in his own backyard." The wolfish edge was receding from his voice, leaving only the deep, commanding tone I knew. But the intensity remained. "Look at me." I forced my head up. His features had settled back into their usual harsh, handsome lines, the sharp jaw, the imperious brow. But his eyes still held that unnatural, captivating light. He was shirtless, his chest heaving. A scar, long and white, cut across his ribs. I'd never seen it before. "Do you understand what you've seen?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "A private moment. It won't leave this clearing. You have my word." He studied me, his gaze a physical weight. "Your word, a human's word." He said it not with contempt, but with a strange curiosity. He took another step, closing the distance between us. I had to crane my neck to hold his gaze. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. "Why aren't you running? Why aren't you screaming?" I had no answer. Fear had frozen me, yes, but beneath it, a pull. A magnetic, stupid, undeniable pull toward the danger of him. Little did I know that pull was a thread, and he was already winding it around his finger. "I serve the pack," I whispered, the standard answer, the safe answer. His lips, surprisingly full for such a severe man, quirked. "You serve me." Before I could respond, another voice cut through the woods, sharp and irritated. "Henry, the patrol's back. They've got a situation. Beta Calvin emerged from the trees, his practical, no-nonsense demeanor immediately slamming a wall of normalcy into the charged space. He glanced at me, then at Henry's bare chest, his brow furrowing. "Emily, you're out late." "She was just leaving," Henry said, his eyes never leaving mine. The command was clear, but something in his tone had shifted. A dismissal, but not a cruel one. "Return to the house. Tell Violet I require tea in my study. You will bring it." A direct order from the Alpha. I nodded, scrambling to pick up the scattered linens, my fingers numb with cold and adrenaline. "And Emily," Henry's voice stopped me as I turned. "The garden path is closed after dusk. Use the main courtyard for your safety." A threat wrapped in concern, or concern disguised as a threat. I couldn't tell. I just fled. The image of his glowing eyes burned into my mind. The main house was a fortress of warm stone and quiet tension. I found Violet, the head of the household staff and the closest thing to a friend I had here, in the vast kitchen. "Tea for the Alpha," I said, my voice still unsteady. Violet, a wiry woman in her 50s with eyes that missed nothing, looked up from her ledger. "You're white as a sheet, girl, breathe." She pushed a cup of water toward me. "What happened?" "I saw him in the woods. He was changing." Violet's face went carefully blank. She was human like me, but she'd served the pack for 30 years. She knew the rules. "That's not for our eyes. You were lucky he didn't rip your throat out for the intrusion. He's been on edge for weeks." She began preparing the tea tray with precise movements. "Ever since the child arrived." The child, a mystery that had rippled through the pack for a month. A little boy, no more than 4, brought to the estate by a perimeter patrol. He was silent, terrified, and according to hushed gossip I wasn't supposed to hear, he smelled of wolf, but of no pack we knew. Henry had taken him into the main house. No explanation. "Why does he care for a stranger's child?" I asked, voicing the question everyone whispered. Violet's lips tightened. "Don't ask questions that don't concern you, Emily. The Alpha's business is his own. Just take the tea. And for the moon's sake, pull yourself together." I carried the heavy silver tray to Henry's study, the familiar route feeling alien tonight. The sounds of the house were amplified. The tick-tock of the grand hall clock, the creak of an ancient floorboard, the distant murmur of voices from the guards' quarters. The door to Henry's study was ajar. I heard voices inside, Henry's low rumble and Calvin's steady report. "I tracked the scent to the northern ridge. It's definitely Patrick's," Calvin was saying. A chill that had nothing to do with the drafty hallway went through me. Patrick, Henry's younger brother, exiled, a name spoken only in curses. "He's getting closer," Henry said, his voice like grinding stone. "He wants the boy back." "The boy isn't his, Henry. The scent's all wrong. The pup doesn't carry Patrick's stink, thank the moon, but he's obsessed." The patrol found another of his markers, a dead fox arranged. A message. "A threat," Henry corrected. There was a long pause. "How is the child?" "Quiet. He only asks for the woman with the kind hands, the human." My breath hitched. He meant me. 2 days prior, Henry had ordered me to take a meal to the child's room. The boy, named Leo, had been crying. I'd sat with him just for a moment and held his small hand. It seemed so insignificant. "Emily," Henry said, and I jumped, realizing I'd been standing there eavesdropping. He'd known I was there the whole time. "Enter." I pushed the door open, my head bowed. The study was all dark wood and leather, smelling of old books and Henry's dominant, spicy scent. Calvin gave me a curt nod and left, closing the door behind him. I was alone with the Alpha. "Set it there," he said, not looking up from a map spread on his desk. I placed the tray on the table by the fireplace, my hands trembling just enough to make the china rattle. "The boy asks for you," Henry stated, finally lifting his gaze. The amber glow was gone, but the intensity was not. I only saw him once, Alpha. He is a child of our kind, traumatized, surrounded by strangers and power he cannot understand. He sees a human woman and feels safe, unthreatened. Henry rose and walked to the fireplace, leaning against the mantel. He had put on a shirt, but it was open at the collar, revealing the top of that scar. You will attend him, daily. From tomorrow, your primary duty is Leo's care. My heart stuttered. Alpha, I'm not a nursemaid, I'm a housemaid. I don't know anything about children, especially werewolf children. You are calm, you are not a wolf, and he has chosen you. His tone brooked no argument. It was an Alpha's command, vibrating in the very air. This is not a request, Emily. Why? The words slipped out, bold and stupid. Why is he so important? Why is Patrick coming for him? His eyes flashed. You ask too many questions. You're putting me in the middle of something. I have a right to know what. He was across the room in a heartbeat, his hand not touching me but slamming onto the table beside my head, caging me in. His presence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of raw authority and wild energy. You have no rights here except those I grant you, he snarled, his voice dropping. You are pack adjacent, a human servant. Your duty is to obey. Tears of frustration and fear pricked my eyes, but I held his gaze. And if I say no? A slow, predatory smile touched his lips. It was more frightening than his anger. You won't. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. His voice dropped to a whisper that vibrated through my bones. Because you felt it in the woods, too. The pull, you're curious about my world, about me, and this is your thread in. He straightened, leaving me cold and shaking. He was right. Damn him, he was right. The child is not mine, he said, turning back to his desk as if the earth-shattering tension had never happened. But by the laws of moon and blood, he is under my protection now. Patrick cannot have him. Your job is to keep him calm and safe and here. Do you understand? I nodded, unable to speak. Good, you start tonight. He's had a nightmare. He's in the East Nursery. Go. The East Nursery was a room that had been unused for decades, now hastily furnished. A small nightlight cast soft shadows. In the big bed, little Leo was curled into a tight ball, his small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The moment I entered, he lifted his head. His eyes in the dim light held a faint, sorrowful silver gleam. He didn't speak, just held out his arms. My resistance melted. I went to him, sitting on the edge of the bed, and he scrambled into my lap, burying his face in my shoulder. He was just a little boy, scared and alone. I held him, humming a tuneless lullaby, feeling the strange, warm energy that radiated from him, a muted version of the power that thrummed in Henry. As his breathing evened out, I saw it. Peeking from under the collar of his pajamas was a birthmark, not an ordinary one. It was a distinct, dark shape in the crude form of a crescent moon cradling a star, the royal mark of the original Alpha bloodline, a mark Henry did not bear. A mark, according to pack legend, that only appeared in a direct air under immense magical stress. Patrick's child, Henry said no, but if not his, then whose? The door to the nursery opened silently. Henry stood there, a massive silhouette watching us. His expression in the shadows was unreadable, but his gaze was fixed on the child in my arms with a focus that was absolute, possessive, and fiercely protective. He's sleeping, I whispered. Henry didn't acknowledge me. His eyes were on the birthmark now visible on Leo's neck. His jaw tightened. He stays with you tonight, Henry murmured, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. You are his anchor now. He began to turn, then stopped. His gaze lifted from the child to me, and in the half-light his eyes glowed again just for a second. Mine, he whispered, so softly I thought I imagined it. But the word hung in the air. a claim that could have been meant for the child, for the pack, or for the human servant holding his most precious charge. He left, closing the door with a final, soft click. I sat in the dark, holding the mysterious child, the Alpha's impossible claim echoing in my ears, and the chilling knowledge that an exiled, obsessed wolf was coming for us. And I, Emily, the servant, was now squarely in the center of the storm. Mine, the word, a low vibration more felt than heard, hung in the air of the study long after Alpha Henry had turned away. It wasn't a question. It was a brand, searing itself into the space between Emily's shoulder blades as she fled the room, Leo's small, trusting hand clutched in hers. The possessive rumble followed her down the hall, a ghost in the polished marble. If only I had known that single word was a key, turning a lock that would trap me in the heart of the storm. The next few days passed in a blur of fragile routine. Emily's world contracted to the sunlit walls of the East Nursery and the silent, watchful child within it. Leo ate when she coaxed him, slept fitfully in the bed she sat beside, and followed her with his eyes, huge, silver pools holding a century of fear. He never spoke, but his small fingers would curl into the fabric of her apron, a silent anchor. Violet observed it all with a pinched expression. "The child has chosen you," she said one afternoon, folding linens with military precision. The snap of cotton punctuated her warning. "That is a weight, Emily, not a gift. In this world, attachments are vulnerabilities, especially with him watching." "Him," Emily whispered, though she knew. "The Alpha," Violet stated, her voice dropping. She glanced at the door as if the shadows themselves might report back. "He doesn't look at servants. We are furniture, but he looks at you. And now you hold his most contested possession." She placed a firm hand on Emily's arm. "Be careful. The wolf is always closer to the surface than you think." The truth of that echoed later that night. Emily was reading softly by Leo's bedside when the forest outside erupted. It wasn't a sound she could easily describe, a cacophony of snarls, a chorus of deep-throated challenges, and the terrible, splintering crash of trees. Leo jolted upright, a silent scream on his face, his small body trembling so violently the bed shook. Emily gathered him instantly, pulling him into her arms, her heart a frantic drum against his. "SHHH, it's all right, it's just the wind," she lied, her own voice unsteady. But it wasn't the wind. It was war, a territorial skirmish on the border. The sounds painted a brutal picture in the dark, claws meeting flesh, the thud of bodies, a sharp, pained yelp that was abruptly cut off. Then, rising above it all, one bone-chilling howl. It was long, laced with fury and a twisted triumph. It didn't belong to Henry's pack. It was foreign, invasive, and familiar. Patrick. The howl faded into a ringing silence. Leo buried his face in Emily's neck, his breath coming in hot, silent gasps. For a long time, they just sat there in the dark, listening to the resumed, tense silence of the estate. No alarm was raised. No one came. It was as if the main house had collectively decided to pretend the violence beyond its walls hadn't happened. What happened next changed everything. The door to the nursery opened without a knock. Alpha Henry filled the frame, backlit by the hall sconces. He was shirtless, a long, angry scratch raking from his collarbone down his torso, gleaming wetly in the low light. The scent of pine, cold earth, and copper blood flooded the room. His eyes glowed, a faint ember-bright gold in the shadows, fixed not on Leo, but on Emily holding him. "He is unsettled," Henry stated, his voice gravelly, as if still touched by the wolf. "Though the noise," Emily managed, holding Leo tighter. Henry stepped inside, closing the door. The room shrank. "My brother sends his greetings." A patrol intercepted his scouting party. He moved to the window, looking out at the black woods. "He is getting bolder, closer." Leo whimpered, a tiny, broken sound. Henry's head snapped around at the noise. In 3 strides, he was beside the bed. Emily instinctively recoiled, but he didn't reach for the child. He knelt. It was such an incongruous, powerful gesture. The mighty Alpha on his knees beside a servant's chair. "Look at me, Leo," Henry commanded, his voice softening into something that was almost, but not quite, gentle. Slowly, the child turned his head. His silver eyes met Henry's gold. "You are under my protection," Henry said, each word a vow carved in stone. "By pack law and by my own will, no one will take you. Do you understand?" Leo stared. Then, after an eternity, he gave the faintest nod. Henry's gaze shifted to Emily. "You kept him calm." I just held him. That is more than anyone else has managed," he said. He rose, his movement fluid despite the injury. "Come, both of you, you will not sleep here tonight." "Where?" Emily asked, fear icing her veins. "My quarters are more defensible. The entire West Wing is." He said it with finality, already turning. It was not an invitation. And that is how Emily found herself leading a drowsy Leo through the hushed, opulent corridors to the Alpha's private domain. The rooms were spacious, dominated by a large fireplace where embers glowed. A connected, smaller chamber held a second bed. Henry pointed to it. "You will both stay there. The door will remain open." It was an order. Emily tucked Leo into the strange bed, the sheets smelling of sandalwood and storm air. The child's eyes were heavy, but they stayed on Henry, who stood by the main room's fireplace, pouring a dark liquid into a glass. The tension was a live wire strung between the 3 of them. "He is not your son," Emily heard herself say, the words leaving her mouth before her mind could censor them. She froze, horrified at her own audacity. Henry stilled. He took a slow drink, then turned. The firelight played over the hard planes of his face and the dry blood on his chest. "No, he is not." "Then why?" The question hung in the air. Why risk war? Why claim him? Why bring me here? Henry studied her. His mother was of a royal line, one thought extinct. The birthmark proves it. Patrick found her first. He disposed of her, intending to raise the child as his own heir, a puppet to claim lands and titles that are not his by right. Henry's knuckles were white around the glass. "I took Leo before he could. A child is not a weapon. He is a person." "And me," Emily whispered, the ghost of his claim in the study wrapping around her. "Why am I here? I'm just a servant." A low growl trickled from his throat. "You are not just anything." He set the glass down with a sharp click. "Leo responds to you. In a world of teeth and fury, you are a harbor. That makes you indispensable. And it makes you a target." He took a step toward the connecting door. "Patrick knows by now. He will see you as a lever, a way to pry the child loose." Emily's blood ran cold. The reality of her position crystallized with terrifying clarity. She was a shield and a weakness all at once. "Sleep," Henry commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are safe within these walls." But as she lay beside the sleeping Leo, listening to the alpha pace the main room like a caged beast, Emily knew it was a lie. The walls felt paper-thin. The safety, an illusion. The scratch on Henry's chest was proof. The danger was already inside. The next morning, routine tried to reassert itself, but the estate was a wound pulled tight. Beta Calvin's report to Henry at breakfast was delivered in terse. Coded phrases Emily wasn't meant to understand, but she caught the key words. "Perimeter breached. 2 injured." He left a token. Henry's face was granite. What token? Calvin's eyes flicked to Emily, who was carefully feeding Leo bites of egg. A child's toy, a carved wolf. It was placed at the foot of the old oak. The snap of Henry's fork breaking against his plate made everyone jump. Leo flinched, and Emily automatically pulled him closer, shooting a fearful look at the alpha. Henry's fury was a physical pressure in the room, but when he spoke, it was with terrifying control. Increase the patrols, triple them. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization. That includes all human staff. Violet, serving coffee, went very still. For how long, Alpha? Indefinitely, Henry said, his eyes finding Emily's. Until the lockdown was immediate. The estate became a gilded prison. The vibrant, if subdued, flow of servants halted. Windows were checked and reinforced. The air grew thick with the scent of anxious wolves and confined humans. Emily felt the walls closing in, but for Leo, the constant presence of Emily and the confined space seemed to have a paradoxical effect. His silence began to thaw. It started with a touch on her hand as she drew the curtains. Then, a soft sigh that almost sounded like her name. And then, 3 days into the lockdown, as they sat on the floor of the West Wing's sitting room building a block tower, he spoke. His voice was a rusty whisper, unused and fragile. "Emily." She dropped a block, her heart soaring. "Leo, you can speak." He nodded, his eyes serious. "The bad wolf wants me," she swallowed. "Alpha Henry won't let him have you. Henry fights." Leo looked toward the study door, where Henry was in another meeting, his low growl of anger audible through the wood. "But the bad wolf is tricky. He smells like candy and rot." A chill crawled down Emily's spine. The description was too vivid, too wrong. Before she could respond, the study door flew open. Henry and Calvin emerged, their faces grim. "Emily," Henry barked, "take Leo to the inner chamber. Now. Do not come out until I fetch you." "What's happening?" "A breach," Calvin said, his jaw tight. "At the southern gate. It's a diversion, but we have to respond." Henry was already shifting, his bones beginning to pop and crack in that horrifying, fluid way. He fixed Emily with a look of pure, primal intensity. "You guard him, with your life." She scooped Leo up and ran to the windowless inner room, Henry's personal vault. She barricaded the door with a heavy chair, holding Leo in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house emptying of wolves, drawn to the distant conflict. The silence that followed was deafening. That's when they heard it. A soft scratch, scratch, scratch at the main outer door of the West Wing. Not a knock. The sound of claws on polished wood. Leo went rigid, a small, terrified noise escaping him. Emily's blood turned to ice. The diversion had worked. The estate was empty of protectors, and the bad wolf who smelled of candy and rot was here. The scratching stopped. In the absolute silence of the vault, the absence of sound was more terrifying than the noise itself. Emily held Leo against her chest, her hand clamped over his mouth, her own breath frozen in her lungs. He's listening, she thought, her blood turning to ice. Or he's picking the lock. The heavy door had no interior lock, only a simple latch. Henry's trust had been its own security. No one would dare breach this room. Until now. A low, guttural chuckle seeped through the thick oak. "Little mouse," a voice cooed, smooth as poisoned syrup. It was nothing like Henry's commanding baritone. This voice was a serpent's whisper, full of malicious amusement. "I can smell your fear, and the pups, it's delicious." Leo trembled violently, a small whimper escaping Emily's fingers. The scent of candy and rot, just as he'd described, was now a palpable miasma under the door. "You have something that belongs to me," Patrick crooned. "My heir, my key to a throne. Give him to me and I'll let you scurry back to your pantry. Refuse." A single, sharp thud hit the door, not a scratch but a powerful blow that made the iron hinges groan. "And I'll peel this door apart and take him from your cold, dead arms." Emily's mind screamed. Every instinct told her to curl into a ball, to hide. But another instinct, newer and fiercer, flared to life. It was the instinct that had made her step into a frozen clearing for a child she didn't know. It was the instinct that had met an alpha's furious gaze and not looked away. Leo is mine to protect. He's not yours, she said, her voice a shaky but defiant whisper. The alpha has claimed him. A beat of stunned silence. Then a roar of laughter. Henry, that sentimental fool, he claims what he cannot hold. He plays at being a king while I am a kingmaker. That child's blood is his right, my right. Another thunderous impact shook the door. Dust sifted from the frame. Emily scrambled back, pulling Leo with her, her eyes darting around the windowless stone room. There was nothing. No weapon, no escape. They were in a tomb. Think, Emily, think. Henry's voice echoed in her memory. The estate is a fortress. My quarters are the strongest point. But the fortress had been breached. The strong point was now a trap. The banging became rhythmic, relentless. Boom, boom, boom. The latch began to bend. He's coming for the boy, not for you, little mouse. Patrick snarled between blows, his voice shifting, becoming less human, frayed by the wolf beneath. You are nothing to him, just a warm body to keep the pup quiet. When I break this door, you will be the first thing I rip apart. His words were meant to shatter her, to make her throw Leo at the door to save herself. But they had the opposite effect. They crystallized a truth she'd been too afraid to name. Henry's intensity, his possession, the way he had moved her into his very den, it was for Leo, yes. But the way he looked at her, mine. He hadn't been looking at Leo when he said it. The latch snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The door swung inward. Patrick filled the doorway. He was taller than Henry, leaner, with a cruel, handsome face twisted by a feral grin. His clothes were torn from the fight at the gate, and his eyes glowed a sickly, violent yellow. The stench of decay and cloying sweetness rolled off him in waves. There you are, he breathed, his gaze locking on Leo. Emily did the only thing she could. She shoved Leo behind her, placing her own body between the child and the monster. You can't have him. Patrick's grin widened. Brave little mouse, how tedious. He lunged. But his movement was a blur cut short by a greater, darker blur that erupted from the main room of the quarters with a roar that shook the very stones. Henry. He didn't come through the door. He came through the wall beside it, exploding in a shower of plaster and splintered wood in his full, monstrous wolf form. He was a mountain of midnight fur and fury, his shoulder bleeding from the earlier skirmish, his eyes burning with pure, undiluted rage. He crashed into Patrick, and the two titans of muscle and claw became a whirlwind of destruction in the confined space of the bedroom. Emily screamed, grabbing Leo and pressing them both into the corner of the vault, as far from the maelstrom as possible. The sounds were horrific. Snarls that vibrated in her bones, the wet tear of flesh, the crunch of impacting bodies against furniture and stone. Patrick, caught off guard, was driven back into the main room. You were at the gate, he howled, his voice a distorted hybrid of man and beast. Henry's answer was a snap of jaws that would have taken off Patrick's head had he not twisted away. In the firelight, Emily saw it. Henry had feigned a full pursuit at the diversion. He'd doubled back. He'd been waiting. For me, she realized, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was protecting us. The fight was brutal and swift. Henry fought with silent, focused lethality. Patrick fought with desperate, shrieking rage. But Henry was the alpha, on his own territory, defending what was his. With a final, powerful swipe of a clawed paw, he sent Patrick crashing through the remains of the bedroom door and into the heavy oak desk in the study beyond. The wood shattered. Patrick lay still for a moment, then shifted, his body contorting back into human form, naked and bleeding from deep gashes across his chest and arm. He tried to rise, coughing blood. Henry shifted as well, the transformation a seamless, terrifying ripple of power. He stood over his brother, breathing heavily, his own wounds steaming in the cold air. He was a statue of wrath carved from shadow and blood. The border skirmish was a test, Henry growled, his voice gravelly from the wolf. The toy was a message. The breach at the gate was a distraction. You always were predictable, Patrick. You want the child so badly you'd walk into the lion's den. A fatal mistake. Patrick spat a glob of blood onto the floor. He is my son. He is the son of a royal you murdered. Henry thundered, the force of his voice making the few intact windows rattle. You killed his mother, your own mate, to steal his birthright. You are no father. You are a parasite, and you are banished. Your life is forfeit if you return. You know the law. Your laws are for sheep, Patrick screamed, pushing himself up on an elbow. His mark makes him a prince. With him, I can unite the scattered royal lines. I can be the power behind the throne. We could rule together, brother. Think of it. I think only of putting you in the ground, Henry said, his tone dropping to a deadly calm. He took a step forward. What happened next changed everything. Patrick's eyes, desperate, darted past Henry, past the broken doorway to where Emily still huddled in the vault, Leo clutched in her arms. A new, cunning hatred flashed in his gaze. You've grown soft, Henry. You keep pets. His lips curled. The human, she's a pretty thing. I smelled your scent all over her. Is she your new whore? Does she warm your bed while you play house with my child? Henry went perfectly still. A new kind of danger filled the room, colder and sharper than the rage before. Careful, brother, Henry whispered. Or what? Patrick taunted, his eyes glinting with malicious insight. You'll kill me. You should have already, but you're hesitating. Why? Because part of you knows I'm right, or because you're too busy protecting your little servant? He drew the word out like a vile curse. Tell me, does she know what you are? Does she know the things you've done? The blood on your hands to get where you are? Silence, Henry commanded, but the power behind the word seemed to falter. She's looking at you now, Henry, Patrick hissed, his voice a venomous drip. Look at her. See the fear in her eyes. It's not just for me anymore, it's for you. She's realizing the monster she's been living with. The monster who stole a child for his own gain. I saved him, Henry roared, finally turning his head a fraction, his eyes meeting Emily's across the wreckage. In that shattered moment, Patrick moved. He didn't attack Henry. With the last of his strength, he scooped up a long, sharp splinter of oak from the broken desk, and with a wolf's speed, hurled it not at Henry, but across the room. Aimed directly at Emily. Time slowed. Emily saw the shard spinning end over end, a wooden dagger flying true. She saw Henry's eyes widen in horror. She saw the trajectory. It would pierce her throat. Henry moved. It wasn't the calculated move of an alpha. It was a raw, reflexive lunge. He threw himself into the path of the missile. The sharpened wood impaled itself deep into the muscle of his side, just below his ribs. He grunted, staggering, but didn't fall. His hand closed around the protruding shaft, his face a mask of pained fury. Patrick used the distraction. He scrambled to his feet and fled, a streak of blood and shadow out through the shattered main door of his quarters and into the dark hallways of the estate. Henry made to give chase, but his leg buckled. The wound was deep. Henry! Emily cried, the name tearing from her throat without title, without thought. She let go of Leo and rushed forward, catching him as he sagged against the doorframe. His blood, hot and shocking, soaked immediately into her dress. I'm fine, he gritted out, but his face was pale. His eyes, however, burned as they searched hers. Are you hurt, Leo? We're okay, she babbled, applying pressure to the wound with her hands. The splinter was lodged deep. You're not fine, you need help. The thunder of paws and footsteps echoed in the corridor. Beta Calvin and two other wolves, in human form and armed, skidded to a halt at the scene of devastation. Their faces were grim. Alpha, the breach was a feint. We tracked a scent loop back to the estate. We failed you, Calvin said, his voice thick with shame as he took in the blood, the wreckage, his Alpha's injury. Patrick, Henry gasped, pointing a bloody hand toward the hall. He's wounded. He can't have gone far. Find him now. Calvin nodded sharply, barking orders. The two enforcers shifted in a crackle of bone and fur and bounded away in pursuit. Calvin remained. Your wound, Alpha. See to the human and the child first, Henry ordered, his gaze still locked on Emily's blood-smeared hands pressing against his side. Henry, please, Emily whispered, tears of shock and fear finally spilling over. Let him help you. The use of his name again seemed to penetrate his pain. He gave a curt nod to Calvin, who moved forward with a field kit. As Calvin worked to carefully remove the splinter and staunch the bleeding, Henry reached up a trembling, bloodied hand and cupped Emily's cheek. You stood before him, he murmured, his thumb stroking her skin, leaving a faint red smear. For Leo, you stood. He was going to take him, she said, her voice breaking. I know. His eyes held hers, the storm in them softening to something more profound, more terrifying. You are Pack now, Emily, not a servant. Pack, do you understand? She didn't. Not fully. But she nodded, because in that moment, with his blood on her hands and his touch on her face, it felt like the only truth left in the world. Calvin cleared his throat, finishing a temporary bandage. The bleeding is slowing. You need moon moss and rest, Alpha. The enforcers will hunt Patrick down. He's cunning. He'll have an escape route planned, Henry said, finally allowing Calvin and Emily to help him to a less damaged chair. He winced, his jaw tight. He's shown his hand. He won't stop. Leo, forgotten in the corner, suddenly let out a small, broken cry. Lie. She immediately went to him, gathering him up. He buried his face in her neck, sobbing quietly. She carried him back to Henry, who looked at the child with an exhaustion that went beyond physical pain. He spoke, Henry stated. Only to me, only a little, Emily said, rocking Leo gently. What did he say? She hesitated, Patrick's vile words echoing. Your little servant. She met Henry's gaze. He warned me. He said Patrick smelled of candy and rot. He knew. Henry's expression darkened. The candy. A synthetic scent to mask the rot of dark magic. Patrick has been consorting with witches. It's how he's masking his trail, how he knew about the royal line. He looked at Calvin. This is bigger than a disgruntled exile. He has allies. Resources. The implications settled over the ruined room like ash. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Hours later, the estate was a hive of quiet, tense activity. The damage to the Alpha's quarters was being assessed. Patrols were doubled. Emily, after being checked for shock by a grim-faced Violet, had refused to go to the servants' wing. She'd cleaned the blood from her hands and Leo's face, and now they sat by the large fireplace in a hastily cleared space of Henry's main room. Henry, his side heavily bandaged, sat in a high-backed chair, sipping a bitter-smelling medicinal tea. The moon moss was working. Some color had returned to his face. Leo slept fitfully in Emily's lap. You should sleep, Henry said, his voice low. I can't, she replied, staring into the flames. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a hollow, trembling awareness. He said things. About you. Henry was silent for a long time. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the distant howl of a sentry wolf on the perimeter. Some of them are true, he finally admitted, the words heavy. I have done violent things. My hands are not clean. The Alpha mantle is not won through kindness, Emily. It is taken and held by strength, and sometimes by ruthlessness. He looked at her, his face all harsh angles in the firelight. Does that frighten you? Yes, she answered honestly, holding his gaze. But Patrick, he enjoys it. You do what you must. There's a difference. He seemed startled by her perception. "A fine line," he murmured. "Why did you really take Leo in?" she asked, the question she'd been too afraid to voice now tumbling out. "If it's so dangerous, if it brings a monster like Patrick to your door, why?" Henry leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Because when I found him, hiding in the ruins of his mother's cabin, covered in her blood but silent as a ghost, he looked at me. Not with fear of the wolf, with recognition. He held out his tiny hand." Henry's own hand clenched into a fist. He was a pawn in a game of thrones he never asked to play. A symbol. To Patrick, he is a key. To the other royal factions, he is a prize or a threat. To me, he looked at the sleeping child. To me, he was just a boy who needed protecting. A chance to break the cycle of power and blood. A chance to do one thing that was right, not just strategic. Emily's heart ached. In that moment, she saw not just the alpha, but the man burdened by a crown of thorns. "And me," she whispered. "Why am I here, really?" Henry stood, moving slowly to stand before her. He loomed over her, but the threat was gone, replaced by an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. "Because when I saw you in the clearing, ready to face a wolf for a stranger's child, I saw a different kind of strength. Not the strength of tooth and claw, the strength of heart. Leo needs that. This pack needs that." He reached down, his fingers gently tilting her chin up. "I need that." His lips were inches from hers. The world narrowed to the heat of his touch, the firelight in his eyes, the shared breath between them. A frantic pounding at the outer door shattered the moment. Calvin burst in, his face ashen. "Alpha." "The enforcers, they found Patrick's trail. It leads to the old limestone caves on the northern ridge." Henry straightened, the alpha snapping back into place. "And..." Calvin's eyes flicked to Emily, then back to Henry, filled with dread. "They found more than a trail. They found a campsite, supplies, symbols carved into the stone." He swallowed hard. He wasn't alone, Alpha, there were others. And the symbols, they're summoning marks. He's not just consorting with witches. Henry's face went dangerously still. "What is he doing, Calvin?" Calvin's voice dropped to a horrified whisper. "He's trying to perform a blood legacy transfer. He's going to use the boy's royal blood in a ritual. Not to crown him, Alpha." The air turned to ice in Emily's lungs. To steal the birthright for himself. Henry's roar of denial shook the room. But it was Leo, waking with a start in Emily's arms, who spoke the words that sealed their fate, his small voice clear and chillingly certain as he stared into the middle distance, seeing something they could not. "The bad man is calling the hungry dark," Leo whispered. "It's coming, it smells like candy, and it's here." Outside, from the direction of the northern woods, a chorus of wolves howled in sudden, unison terror, a sound no werewolf should ever make. And then, every single one was cut off. Silence. Absolute, unnatural silence fell over the entire estate. If only I had known then that Patrick's obsession was just the beginning. That the real monster wasn't the exiled wolf, but the ancient, ravenous thing he was so foolishly trying to leash. And that the key to stopping it wasn't Henry's strength, or his pack's loyalty. It was the silent child in my arms, and the royal blood running through his veins. Blood that was now a beacon in the dark, calling something that hadn't walked this earth for 1,000 years. The unnatural silence that fell after Leo's words was absolute. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that smothered the distant crickets, the rustle of leaves, the very breath of the world. The hungry dark. It wasn't just here. It was listening. Henry's head snapped up, his golden eyes scanning the vault's ceiling as if he could see through stone. His wound, a jagged tear in his shoulder from Patrick's wooden projectile, was already knitting together, but the scent of his blood was sharp in the dead air. "He's begun," Henry growled, the sound low and furious. The ritual, that silence, it's a witch's working. It's drawing the veil thin. Beta Calvin materialized in the shattered doorway, his face ashen. The perimeter wards are dead, Alpha. No sound crosses them. We're blind and deaf. Gather everyone in the main hall. Now, Henry ordered, his voice cutting through the eerie quiet. He turned to Emily, his gaze fierce. You stay with me, with Leo. Do not leave my side. Do you understand? It wasn't a request. It was a law. I understand, Emily whispered, her arms tightening around Leo. The child was trembling, his small fingers clutching her dress, his eyes wide with a knowledge no child should possess. What happened next changed everything. We moved not as alpha and servant, but as a single unit. Henry led, a lethal shadow, with Emily and Leo in his wake, and Calvin as their rear guard. The main house was a tomb. The other servants, Violet among them, her face a mask of grim resolve, huddled in the grand hall, their fear a palpable scent in the witch-stilled air. They watched, wide-eyed, as Henry, with Emily and the child, passed through without stopping. Their stares were a physical pressure on Emily's back. She was with the Alpha. She was part of the danger. Henry didn't stop until we reached his study. He went straight to a heavy cabinet, unlocking it with a key from his pocket. Inside were not books, but weapons. Silver-tipped daggers, old revolvers with carved handles, and vials of murky liquid. He took 2 daggers, handing one to Calvin. Then he selected a smaller, slender blade with a bone handle. He turned to Emily. You will take this, he said, his voice leaving no room for refusal. I don't know how to use it, she protested, her voice barely a whisper in the silence. You point the sharp end at anything that isn't me, Leo, or Calvin, he stated, pressing the cool hilt into her palm. His fingers lingered over hers. It's ironwood, soaked in wolfsbane and white ash. It will hurt anything unnatural, even a witch. The weight of the blade was terrifying. It was a final, irrevocable step out of her world of linens and tea trays and into his world of blood and magic. She nodded, tucking it into the belt of her dress, feeling its alien presence against her hip. Leo whimpered, burying his face in Emily's neck. The dark is chewing, he mumbled, his words slurred with terror. Where, little prince? Henry asked, kneeling before him, his voice softer than Emily had ever heard it. Where is the dark chewing? Leo pointed a shaky finger north, toward the limestone caves. He's drawing on the child's energy, even from a distance, Calvin muttered. Using the blood link, it's weakening him. Henry's jaw tightened. A plan solidified in his eyes, ruthless and clear. We end this. Tonight, he wants a legacy. He'll find only an ending. He looked at Emily, a storm of conflict in his gaze. The safest place for you is here, behind every warrior I have. But the ritual is tied to Leo. His presence, his fear, his very blood is fuel. If we leave him here, Patrick's pull might be strong enough to drain him from afar. Or worse, draw the hungry dark here to this house full of defenseless people. The unspoken conclusion hung in the silent room. Emily heard it. You need him as bait, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. No, Henry corrected, his gaze burning into hers. I need you. Patrick saw it. He knows Leo's anchor is you. The child's strength comes from you. If we take Leo to the source of the ritual, we can break Patrick's focus. But to do that, I need you to be Leo's shield. His light in that dark. Can you do that? If only I had known what that question truly meant. I thought it was about courage. It was about sacrifice. Yes, Emily said, the word leaving her lips before she could reconsider. For Leo, who had chosen her in his silence. For this strange, brutal man who had called her Pack. Henry's hand came up, cupping her cheek for a fleeting electric moment. Then we run. We ran through the silent woods. The world was a muted painting, our own frantic breaths and footfalls the only sounds. Henry and Calvin moved in their wolf forms, massive, sleek beasts of shadow and muscle, flanking Emily as she ran, Leo a heavy, trusting weight in her arms. The bone-handled knife slapped against her thigh. The northern ridge loomed ahead, a darker blot against the starless sky. A new sound began to seep through the witch's silence, a low, rhythmic chanting. It was not one voice, but several, twisted together in a dissonant harmony that made Emily's teeth ache. The air grew colder, smelling of damp stone, ozone, and something sweetly rotten. The entrance to the limestone caves was a jagged maw in the hillside. Before it, a circle of black candles flickered with unnatural green flame. Inside the circle, figures hooded in dark robes moved, their chants rising in pitch. And in the center, bound to a flat altar stone, was Patrick. But he was not the victim. He was the conductor. His shirt was torn open, revealing crude, bloody symbols carved into his own chest. Opposite him, on a smaller stone, lay a doll-like figure made of wax and cloth, a lock of pale hair, Leo's, visible upon it. A complex pattern of blood and salt connected the two stones. "He's using his own body as the conduit," Calvin snarled in a half-whisper, having shifted back to his human form behind a screen of boulders. "He's linked to the doll, and the doll is linked to Leo. The witches are feeding him power to pull the legacy through." Henry, now also human, naked and unashamed in the moonlight, watched with lethal focus. "The circle must break. The doll must be destroyed. Emily," he turned to her, his eyes glowing faintly. "When we move, the circle's protection will falter. You will feel it. Leo will feel it. Get to the doll, use the knife, don't hesitate." She nodded, her throat too tight for words. Leo was limp in her arms, his energy being sapped, his eyes half closed. Henry and Calvin shared a look, a lifetime of understanding in a glance. Then they moved. They exploded from the rocks not as men, but as forces of nature. Henry went straight for the circle, a silver dagger in each hand. Calvin veered to flank, aiming for the chanting witches. The moment Henry's foot crossed the line of black candles, the green flames roared high, and the silence shattered into a cacophony of snarls, shrieks, and breaking magic. The reaction was instantaneous. Two of the hooded figures fell, their chants cut short by Calvin's crushing blows. But the others held, their voices rising, and the very shadows around the cave entrance seemed to writhe and stretch. The hungry dark. Patrick's eyes flew open. They were pure, sickly yellow, no trace of his brother's gold. He saw Henry and let out a mad laugh. "Brother, you brought me my offering." Henry didn't speak. He fought, a whirlwind of silver and fury trying to reach the altar. But the witch's magic was a tangible thing, shimmering barriers of force, grasping tendrils of shadow that slowed his every step. "Emily, now," Henry roared, straining against a coil of darkness that wrapped around his arm. The consequence was a surge of icy dread that shot from the circle, straight for Leo. The child screamed, a sound of pure agony, and the wax doll on the stone glowed with a malevolent light. "His anchor is you." Emily ran. She didn't think. She clutched Leo to her chest, the knife held out before her like a talisman. She crossed the broken candle line. The air turned thick and greasy, resisting her like deep water. A hooded figure turned toward her, raising a hand. A bolt of cold, black energy shot forth. Emily did the only thing she could. She turned her body, shielding Leo, and raised the bone-handled knife. The dark energy struck the blade. There was a shriek of tearing metal and a higher, more human scream of pain. The knife absorbed the attack, the bone handle growing icy cold, but the witch recoiled, clutching a smoking hand. Emily stumbled forward, falling to her knees beside the smaller altar stone. The wax doll pulsed with Leo's stolen life force. She could see his features in its twisted face. Without a second thought, she drove the ironwood blade down into the doll's heart. The scream that echoed wasn't just from the doll or from Patrick. It was from the earth itself. The green candles snuffed out. The chanting stopped. The writhing shadows recoiled. On the main altar, Patrick arched backwards, the symbols on his chest burning as if branded. "No," he howled. "It was mine." The break in the ritual was all Henry needed. He shattered the final magical barrier and was upon his brother. He didn't use the silver daggers. He used his hands, tearing Patrick from the altar and hurling him to the ground. "It was never yours," Henry snarled, his voice the final judgment of the Alpha. "You murdered his mother. You would have consumed his soul, for power, for a throne made of bones." Patrick, broken and bleeding, looked up, his madness fading into a terrible, clear despair. "You were always the strong one, Henry, the righteous one. What did it get you? A lonely crown. He could have made us kings." His eyes slid past Henry to where Emily rocked a sobbing Leo. Hatred rekindled. "She's just a human, weak, a pet. You'll see, they always break." Henry's foot came down on Patrick's throat, not to crush, but to silence. "She is stronger than you will ever know." He looked at Calvin, who stood amidst the fallen witches. "Bind him with silver. He will face pack law." But the new question came from the cave itself. The shattered ritual had not sent the hungry dark away. It had freed it. From the deepest black of the cave mouth, it poured. It had no true shape, only a suggestion of claws and jaws and endless, starving void. It was the negative space of magic, the echo of the atrocity Patrick had attempted, and it was drawn to the brightest source of life in the clearing, to Leo, and to Emily, who held him. It flowed toward them, a tide of freezing shadow. "Emily!" Henry's cry was raw with a fear she'd never heard. He abandoned Patrick, moving faster than sight, but the dark was already there, coiling around her legs, leeching the warmth from her skin, whispering 1,000 empty promises of peace if she would just let go. She held on to Leo, singing a shaky, nonsensical lullaby against the terror, her own light dimming. The ironwood knife was useless against this formless thing. Henry reached her. He didn't try to fight the dark with tooth or claw. Instead, he wrapped his massive arms around both her and Leo, pulling them tight against his chest. He threw his head back and howled. It was the Alpha's call, but magnified 100-fold. It was not a sound of challenge, but of claim, of territory, of family. It was a song of pure, defiant life. The sound waves hit the hungry dark like a physical blow. The shadows writhed, fraying at the edges. But it wasn't enough. The dark was too strong, born of a royal ritual. It began to seep into Henry, too, seeking to devour his immense vitality. Emily saw the strain on his face, saw the light in his golden eyes flicker. He was using his own life force as a shield, and it was being eaten away. He would die here, holding them, and it would still not be enough. The answer came to her in a flash of memory. His anchor is you. Henry had said it of her and Leo. But who was Henry's anchor? He carried his pack, his duty, his lonely crown. But who held him? She did. With the last of her warmth, she moved one arm from around Leo and pressed her palm flat against Henry's chest, over his pounding heart. She stopped singing the lullaby. She looked into his fading eyes and spoke his name, not as a title but as a truth. "Henry, I am here. We are here. Your pack is here." It was a claim as primal as his own. A shudder went through him. A new light, not just gold but edged with a brilliant, pure white, erupted from where her hand met his skin. It wasn't her light or his. It was something forged between them. It shot through the connecting dark, not fighting it but filling it. The hungry dark could not consume this. It was not a single life force to be drained, but a bond, a circuit of protection and belonging that had no end. With a final, silent shriek of negation, the shadows unraveled, dissipating into the cool night air like smoke. The real sounds of the forest rushed back in the wind, an owl, the distant howl of a pack warrior. The silence was broken. Henry slumped forward, his forehead resting against Emily's, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Leo's crying had quieted to soft hiccups, his small hand reaching out to touch Henry's stubbled cheek. "You," Henry breathed, his voice wrecked with emotion. "How did you—" "You said I was Pack," Emily whispered, her own tears finally falling. "Pack doesn't let go." Behind them, Calvin secured the last silver chain on an unconscious Patrick. The remaining witches had fled into the woods. The crisis was over. The aftermath was quiet, profound. In the days that followed, Patrick was judged by the full pack under the moon. His crimes, murder of a royal, trafficking with dark witches, attempted consumption of a child's legacy, left only one sentence. He was executed, not with rage, but with solemn finality. Henry carried it out himself. It was his duty and his burden. Emily was no longer a servant. There was no decree, no announcement. It was simply a fact, woven into the fabric of the pack's understanding. She and Leo remained in the West Wing, but the doors were never locked. Her room was not a vault, but a sanctuary, connected to Henry's by a sitting room they now shared. One evening, weeks later, Emily found Henry in his study, staring into the fire. Leo was asleep in the adjoining room, finally dreaming peaceful dreams. "You never told me," she said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "About Leo's mother, what really happened." Henry didn't look away from the flames. She was a descendant of the Silvermane line, hiding from those who would use her. Patrick found her. He wanted her power, her claim. When she refused him, he killed her. I tracked him too late. I found Leo in the ruins of her cabin, hiding under her body. He wasn't crying. He was just waiting. Patrick's scent was all over him. I took him. I claimed him, not for power, because it was the only thing left of her that wasn't blood and ashes. He finally looked at her, his gaze open and weary. Patrick was right about one thing. I wanted a legacy, but not a throne, a family. Something to protect that was mine by choice, not just blood or conquest. Emily walked into the room, stopping before his chair. "And me?" she asked, her heart in her throat. "Was I just part of protecting him?" Henry reached out and took her hand, pulling her gently onto his lap. He surrounded her, his warmth, his scent, his quiet strength. "Emily," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. "You were the question I never knew to ask. The answer I was too afraid to want. When you stood in my clearing, when you defied my brother, when you filled that darkness with light, you didn't just save Leo. You saved me, from the loneliness, from the cold. You are not part of my legacy. You are the foundation of it." He kissed her then, and it was not the claiming of an alpha, but the promise of a man. It was a seal on the bond that had defied magic and shadow. It was a beginning. In the garden the next morning, under a bright sun, Leo laughed as he chased a butterfly. The sound was like bells, erasing the last echoes of silence. He ran to Emily, who sat on a bench beside Henry, and clambered up between them, claiming his place. Henry's arms settled around Emily's shoulders, his fingers brushing her arm. He looked at the child, then at the woman, and a peace settled over his features, deep and true. The strange obsession had run its course, transforming into something else entirely. It was no longer an obsession with a servant or a claim on a child not his own. It was a devotion, hard-won and fiercely guarded, for the alpha, his human mate, and the little royal prince they had chosen together to call their own. Their pack was small, unorthodox, and stronger than any dark magic. It was, finally, home.